And we're back with our political panel. Ruth Marcus is a columnist and deputy editorial page editor for The Washington Post. Ramesh Ponnuru is with the National Review. Ed O'Keefe covers politics for The Washington Post and is now a CBS News contributor. And Michael Duffy is deputy managing editor for Time magazine. Michael, let me start with you. What did we learn with the Syrian operation about President Trump?
I think we learned a couple things, John. First, he was able to move quickly. The whole thing from the original attack to the U.S. counterattack, less than 2 days, 70 hours or something like that, and in a very limited way. That may have surprised some of his critics on the left. At the same time, he was able to, in opposition to his campaign rhetoric and much of his tweeting over the last years, go against his sort of isolationist perspective and actually intervene in a complicated situation overseas. What happens next, just as complicated. Third, he did it at a time when he was hosting a visit from the leader of the largest country in the world. That had to be interesting for the Chinese to watch. And it certainly sent a signal, I think, not only to his guests, but also other leaders around the world, that perhaps they had to recalculate how President Trump might think about his role overseas. And finally, he did this in a way that garnered bipartisan support, and I think then encouraged the public to follow.
Ramesh, picking up on Michael's point about what a departure this was. So we have neoconservatives in the conservative ranks. We have nationalists. There are a lot of words that get thrown around about philosophical approaches to foreign policy. Where did this action fit in that canon, and also relative to where Donald Trump was just maybe even a week ago?
Well, I think that it may be that the real foreign policy doctrine of this administration is keep them guessing, and not just in operational terms. If you think about what President Trump said in discussing these strikes, he said America has to stand for justice. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson said earlier in the week that we needed to act on behalf of the international community. That fits squarely in a liberal internationalist and neoconservative foreign policy establishment that Trump seemed to reject root and branch during the campaign. If you take that rhetoric of this week seriously, then the sorts of things Senator McCain is saying follow from it. If we really are going to stand for justice, we need to have a broader intervention in Syria. Is Trump willing to take his own words to their logical conclusion that way? I'm not sure that he should, and I'm not sure that he will.
Do you think, Ruth, that there is a downside when you speak in moral terms? As Ramesh just nicely pointed out, you speak in moral terms. Is it only a one-off? Doesn't morality transfer into other areas, put you on the hook for action in other places?
If you believe that what you need to do is to set a consistent theme and be part of a consistent whole, yes, consistency has not always been Donald Trump's strong point. And you talked about a week ago, the flip was even quicker than that. On Tuesday, President Trump said, I don't want to be the president of the world. And on Wednesday, he said, I now have the responsibility. So I don't think we know yet what the Trump doctrine is. Is the Trump doctrine that if there is video of dead, beautiful babies, that we will act? Secretary Tillerson spoke about earlier chemical attacks that were not responded to. Or is it more of the logical conclusion that war crimes are war crimes, dead people are dead people, whether they are killed by barrel bombs or by chemical attacks? This is a data point, a really interesting one, as Michael said. We don't know precisely where it leads.
Well, and I think, a real test of it could come in response to what's happened in Egypt today. 2 Coptic Christian churches bombed. This was a presidential candidate who ran around the country saying that we cannot allow ISIS to attack Christians around the world. ISIS has already taken responsibility for these attacks this morning. Look at what he said last February after the Pope questioned his Christianity. He said, I will not allow Christianity to be consistently attacked and weakened, unlike what is happening now with our current president. If he says that kind of stuff on the campaign trail and he doesn't really respond to what happened today, I think there are a lot of supporters, frankly, who will wonder how consistent he's being. Those earned him some of the loudest applause lines back in the day when he would talk about attacks on Christians around the world. And this is certainly a pretty brazen one today.
But another thing that earned him applause lines was talking about America first.
Right.
So there are a lot of Trump supporters who are wondering where they stand in here. That's another strain on him.
Well, I wonder, Ramesh, do you think he pays any political price within his own group of supporters who said, as Ruth said, you weren't going to be adventuresome like this. Repeatedly, Donald Trump on the campaign trail said he wouldn't do just the kind of thing he's just done.
Some of his strongest and earliest supporters have been expressing some serious doubts about this action. I think the question really is it a one-off? If he gets more deeply involved in Syria, then I think that some of those people start becoming outright opponents of him. But if he doesn't, if he just moves on, then I don't think that happens. The other interesting thing is what happens to the opposition. Nothing the president has done has earned more praise from the Democrats than this military action this week, which is kind of odd in a way. They've been portraying him as this great menace until the moment he starts firing missiles, and then suddenly he's a statesman.
Michael, one of the ongoing themes of the question about the Trump administration is what happens in a crisis. Who's in the room? Does the president listen to them? You could see the Secretary of State, well, A, assess the Secretary of State for me if you would like to. B, you could see him, and you've seen it in other administration officials, really talking about how the president was asking questions on the beam. There seemed to be an effort here to make a case about his competency in this kind of moment. How do you read the internal workings of the Trump team?
It's way too early to begin to read it. You and I both know that every time there's a first foreign policy crisis, the anecdotes usually tumble out of the White House the next day saying the president was asking a lot of questions, no matter who the president is, no matter what decade it is. I think there is a moment in every presidency where the commander-in-chief becomes president. This isn't a job you can prepare for. You only get on-the-job training. Even those who are particularly qualified, which this one wasn't, only can really understand what it's like once you're faced a test like this. On Wednesday, in that Rose Garden moment, there was this little bite of President Trump saying, I have the responsibility, just the day after the tweet about I don't want to be president, which made me think...
Of the world.
Yeah, of the world. Right, which is good because he wasn't elected to that. But it made me think, oh, he now is finally putting on this uniform for the first time, that it's just now kind of, on this respect, getting to him. And that's one of the things about whether it's his critics on the left or the right or his supporters or the people who don't like him are going to have to contend with, which is that every president grows into the job as they face the challenges and the inbox gets more complicated.
All right, we're going to go on to the other items in the inbox. Stay here. All of you will be back after a break. Stay with us. We're back with our panel. Ramesh, I want to start with you. We're going to do a little tea leaf reading about the White House staff because there have been lots of stories this week, some related to the Syrian action, other not connected with it, about turmoil within the White House and a confrontation at some level between Steve Bannon, senior advisor to the president, and Jared Kushner, his son-in-law. What do you make of that conflict to the extent it exists, and what do you make of the millions of stories about it, which are themselves the product of a certain set of behavior at the White House?
The fact that you mean that everybody is leaking about their internal opposition. I think that this is a highly factionalized administration. It has been a highly factionalized administration from the very beginning. And that doesn't seem to be something that President Trump minds. That seems to be part of the management structure that he prefers. He does seem, though, to get upset if too much of it spills into the papers and then it gets reined back in. But I don't think that is something that is going to change because I think that's just built into the way he runs things.
Ed, yesterday there was the White House was using the messaging channels of the White House to say there was a meeting. Kushner and Bannon were told by the president to knock it out, work together. And so, but when you're issuing press releases essentially to say everybody's on the same page, isn't that itself a sign?
And when the Secretary of State himself had to point out to you that everyone worked together as a good team, trying to get out ahead of those questions, I think it's a sign that it is a real problem. I could tell you up at the Capitol, Republicans are privately frustrated by all this because they see it as a big distraction. And it keeps them from being able to do the big things. They couldn't get health care reform done despite all the reliance they were putting on the White House Chief of Staff and the Health and Human Services Secretary. Steve Bannon strong-arming a bunch of House Republicans at the 11th hour didn't work. He has few fans up on Capitol Hill. I think the only one that will really bring pause to lawmakers especially is if Reince Priebus is somehow shown the door. They see him as a critical component in getting the legislative agenda passed that the president wants and that Republicans want, because he's one of the few who can really speak as an equal or someone who understands Congress in that White House.
And with connections to the House Speaker Paul.
So I suppose if we were to freeze frame it this morning, and that's a risky thing to do, it feels to me at least like Priebus has managed to implement a truce between Kushner and Bannon. How long this truce holds is anybody's guess, a week, maybe two. And the reason it's going to be hard to hold is that the ideology, some of it is about tactics and all that stuff, but some of it's just ideology. This is a White House with a broad spectrum of views, ranging from Bannon and the sort of nationalist view on the right, to Jared Kushner and Gary Cohn, who, if they aren't moderate Democrats, are certainly non-ideological. So that's at least half the American political spectrum and a little bit more. That's much more than, say, Jim Baker to Ed Meese under the Reagan administration. It's a big gap. It's a big gulf. And they won't be able to, until they have a decision-making process that includes everyone, they're not going to get past this, and we'll have another blow-up soon.
And also, Ruth, as Michael pointed out, when you have a spectrum like that, that spectrum comes into conflict with issues. I mean, these people care about what they care about, and issues are complicated. And so, isn't as they deal with issues, this conflict is going to arise no matter how much they try and paper it over?
They can try to paper it over. This is, as Michael said, this is different from other White Houses. They're usually jockeying for power. This is jockeying for ideology. And then there's another really big difference that we haven't talked about, which is one of these people is not like the other because his father-in-law is the president of the United States. That makes him a little bit unfireable. So I've never been a president, but I have been a parent. You can tell the kids to knock it off, but it doesn't always work the first time or even the second time.
Just two quick points. Priebus doesn't belong in either of these factions.
Right.
He's not a nationalist. He's not a New York liberal. He's a fairly conventional conservative that could give him a position to be a kind of balancing point if he lasts. But the other thing, if you think about the impact this is having on this administration, during crucial debates on Capitol Hill about tax policy, about health care reform, nobody has quite known what the administration wants because it's not clear the administration knows what it wants.
Well, and that's the key deal. This is not just inside kind of interesting behind-the-scenes stuff. This matters to actual policy. Ed, let's switch now. Supreme Court. Tell us what happened this week, and obviously Judge Gorsuch is now an associate justice, but other things happened too.
That's right. Well, they got rid of a long-standing procedural rule that they used, the filibuster, and now it means that all presidential nominees, whether you're a cabinet secretary, a commission chairman, a district court judge, or a Supreme Court justice, gets in with a majority vote. That will matter more, I think, when the party that controls the White House controls the Senate, in that you'll be able to get through more ideological or partisan picks in all cases. But it'll be interesting if one day we have a White House and a Senate controlled by either party, and it requires a little more negotiation. I will say this, while a lot of us might bemoan the end of this, senators themselves were kind of over it. This began, you'll remember, back in 2013. The Democrats started eliminating the filibuster. This week, to quote the old Martina McBride song, my give a damn's busted, their give a damn was busted. They didn't care. Just get it over with. Let's move on. The hope when they get back from a 2-week recess is that they can work more seriously and in a bipartisan way on tax reform and all the other things that they want to get done this year.
Why, Ruth, didn't Democrats wait and have this fight for the next justice that Donald Trump is likely to have to nominate?
That would have been smarter. It would have put them in a better position. It would have helped to hold off a more extreme nominee. And it would have put them in a better position if they were going to eventually lose the fight. But we were in this position where both of the leaders, both Mitch McConnell, the Republican leader, and Chuck Schumer, the Democratic leader, actually wanted this fight, were arguing against their members who wanted to find the solution. And it really leaves a lot of poisonous feelings.
Okay, we're going to end on that joyful note of poisonous feelings. Thanks to all of you. Thanks for watching. We'll be back in a moment.